All right, question time. Turn to a neighbor or two and consider for just a minute here the question, what is precious and scarce in your life? Or, if that's a tough one, what does it seem like there is too little of? Turn and Annalise had it right away. Money. Turn and discuss for a moment, and we'll collect our answers at the end. What is precious and scarce in your life, or what does it seem like there's too little of? All right, some things that are precious and scarce or that there's too little of. Wave your hand and shout it out. Time. Yes. R&R. This is from the guy who spent 6 days sleeping because he had a sinus infection. I'm jealous, man. What else? Annalise, what is there too little of? Or what's precious and scarce? You had a great answer. The toys? She said money. I also heard her say toys. Toys. What else? What is precious and scarce? Sleep. This one knows about that. Yes. Good health. Yeah. Time with family. Yeah. There are a lot of things in our lives which are precious to us and scarce. Not precious only because they're scarce. Precious no matter what, but things that we long for. Things that we want to have in abundance and maybe we don't always. Things which are a sacrifice for us. When I think about the story of this is kind of traditionally called the widow's mite, right? And mite is just this little tiny little bit. When I think about this story, I'm reminded of a family member of mine who tells a story about one of his coworkers. And he was an insultingly bad tipper at restaurants. How bad was it? Thank you. It was so bad that if he went to a restaurant and he got good service, he would tip a stick of gum. And if he got bad service, he would tip half a stick of gum. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. That's horrible. I never had to eat lunch with the guy being talked about. He's not a family member of mine. This is a story I'm getting through the grapevine. But let me tell you, I don't know if I could do that. I would have a really hard time being at the table with someone who was so egregiously bad tipper. And we tend to judge the gift by its size, don't we? I mean, in this case, in the case of this stick of gum, it's a small gift and therefore it is insulting. It's so small that it's meaningless. Actually, it carries a meaning which is the opposite of generosity. Because the person receiving that tip doesn't think, well, at least I got something, right? Well, at least I got a stick of gum. It's not like I got nothing out of it. There's a such thing as a gift that is so small that it would have been better if they had given nothing at all. And that's what that stick of gum is. That's why I think that's kind of horrible. And when we look at this story today, we think a penny is an insultingly small amount of money. It's insultingly small. It's so small that it would have almost been better if she had given nothing at all. Sometimes we need to retell the story in modern terms in order to get at the heart of it. So let me suggest I could retell the story this way. A woman gets paid every 2 weeks, but she doesn't make very much. And by the time day 13 comes around, she's getting paid every 14 days, there's not much left. And she shows up at church, and she puts her last $2 in the offering plate. And she leaves that day, and she returns to an empty apartment with an empty refrigerator. The amount given is not an insulting amount. It's a sacrificial amount. It's just what was left. By contrast, in our story that Jesus has about Jesus today, where he's confronting the scribes, he's confronting the religious leaders, the scribes have given more money but less of themselves. They've given more money but less of themselves. Deuteronomy 14 lists the people who ought to receive special consideration when it comes to the receiving charitable money. Okay? Deuteronomy 14, 27 and 28. And the interesting thing is that in addition to the resident aliens, which is to say foreigners in the land of Israel, the orphans, that is to say people, children with no family to take care of them, and the widows who had no man in a culture that was dominated by men to take care of them, in addition, also listed there is the Levites. And the Levites were the tribe of Israel, or the clan that was entrusted with religious leadership in that day. So the scribes, the modern day version of the Levites here, the religious leaders of their day, ought to be considered among the resident aliens and the orphans and the widows in your towns, so that they may come and eat their fill, so the Lord your God may bless you in all the work you undertake. And the scribes obviously had drifted away from this ideal. You see, all of these people, it was thought, have to rely on God. Resident aliens, because they have no family in the land and they can own no land. It actually was not permitted that foreigners were allowed to own land. Orphans had to depend on the community for their survival. In a cold winter, that could be very important. Widows had to depend on kinsfolk in the community and the community, the elders, to make sure that they were not abused and taken advantage of and driven further and further, deeper and deeper into poverty. But also, these religious leaders needed to be taken care of because they weren't allowed to have land either. It's all tied up in the idea of land and land ownership. That they were not given an inheritance with the other tribes of Israel. They had to instead draw something from those who were contributing to the treasury of the religious worship and eventually the temple. So the scribes were supposed to rely on God, and instead, by this point, they were obviously relying on themselves. Why were they relying on themselves? Because they have so much, the fancy flowing robes and the huge checkbook and all that sort of thing, that when they went to give, they gave in a very showy manner. Now, as an illustration, as a picture of what this offering would have been like, it wouldn't necessarily have been like a plate being passed around. It was probably a metal box, and it would have made a lot of noise when you put money in. Actually, a better image than an offering plate would be this. This is our children's offering bottle, and the kids like this because it's fun to drop money in, and it makes a noise. And it's just, kind of a challenge to get the money in the little hole there, too. This is the picture of what it would have been like. So they would have taken their big bag of big, loud, shiny coins, and they would have noisily dumped it in the box, and they would have said aloud public prayers, not so that they're talking to God, but so that everybody around them could see how self-righteous and pious they were and respect them even more. They could preserve their social status. You see, they obviously don't need any of that special provision that Deuteronomy 14 is talking about. They obviously have it covered on their own. They seem to be getting along just fine. They've become untethered from their purpose. Their purpose was leadership in service. Their purpose was to sacrifice for the people. And instead, they have the people sacrificing for them. It's possible to give and have it drag you farther into sin. It's possible to give and have it drag you farther into sin. See, by being big givers, they had put on big airs. They wore fancy, colorful robes, and they said long prayers to look really self-righteous. And the idea was that by their big gifts, they thought that they were more important. The widow, on the other hand, gives all of herself. She's like the boy in the children's message today who climbs into the offering plate. I actually wanted to look it up because the idea of giving just a penny seemed like a strange thing to me today. And a penny is an American term for money. And so I was curious how much she really would have been giving, like how much the coins that she dropped in, because it actually names the coins in the original Greek. It names which coins she put in. And it turns out that if you figure out what it would have been in the modern day, at least according to the one article I looked at, the answer is it would have been worth about $1.88. $1.88. That's how much she put in the offering plate that day. No, not a penny. Not an insultingly small amount. Giving all she had. The money is insignificant, but the trust is significant. You see, because by giving all that she has, she's put herself in the position that the Levites ought to have occupied in the first place. Totally reliant, totally dependent on an abundant God. So, Pastor Ted, what's our solution? Are we to give every dollar we have to the church? Yes! Just kidding, no! But we are to give all of ourselves. So the question that we started with is the question that we conclude with today. What is scarce for you? Giving out of your abundance is a way to bless the church. It's a way to promote the mission that we have of sharing the gospel with all the people in this community. I'm not telling you not to give. I hope that you'll increase your stewardship this year. During the announcements, you're going to hear about our commitment cards, and we'll be collecting those back up next Sunday. So please join me in increasing your pledge. But if you want to be a better disciple of Jesus, find out what's scarce in your life and give that. If it's your time, if you need to make a sacrifice of your time, then find a way to serve on a regular basis. There are ministries at Spirit of Grace. There are activities in our community which allow you to do that. Let me give you an example of one that I'm learning more about now. Teammates. Teammates is a program in our schools where you spend an hour a week with a kid. I think it's an amazing program. I'm excited about getting involved in it. And I hope maybe some of you who have a little extra time, or for whom time is a scarce thing and it would be a sacrifice, and who can maybe have lunch with the kid, be able to do that. If it's your peace and quiet, maybe it's time to give some of that up. There are plenty of things that you can do in youth ministry that'll give up a little bit of peace and quiet. Maybe it's your sanity. If it's your sanity, we'd like you to hold on to what you've got. What's scarce for you? Whatever you do, whether you're able to give in abundance monetarily, or whether you have just enough to scrape by and you can't give much, whether you have lots of time because maybe you're retired, and although retired people are busy too, and they can give lots more time than maybe other people who are working can or not, whether you're going to be able to sacrifice through your church to serve and bless others with the gospel, or you are doing God's work in the community by volunteering through a service organization. Whatever you do, give out of gratitude. And here's why. Because if giving is to change our hearts and to make us what we ought to be, so that we become tethered and reconnected to our purpose, so that we're no longer adrift from that and trying to serve our own self-righteousness, but instead are trying to grow in our discipleship, grow in our faithfulness to God, then we need to give out of a sense of gratitude that is rooted in the reality that Jesus Christ came to earth for you, died for you, rose for you, so that you might experience life in its abundance, not abundance as the world defines it, but abundance which is spiritual hope, which is connected to our hope in the gospel. Jesus, God's Son, gave abundantly for you in his death and resurrection. May you know that sacrifice and its meaning in your life, and may you live out discipleship which is rooted in that sacrifice for others. Finally, today is Veterans Day. And no matter where you are with questions of military and the wars that we've been in, the men and women who serve in our armed forces give us a great illustration of sacrifice, because they've shown themselves willing time and time again to take on responsibility and danger, to go to places that we wouldn't want to go, to do things that we wouldn't want to do, even to give up their very lives to take care of us. That's a picture and an image of the sacrificial way that we can live, which is something that we are called to through the church. May you this day remember those who have served and follow their example in service by giving yourself, by sacrificing. In Jesus' name, amen.